We are back and we are joined once again by Zachary Foster, historian of Palestine, proprietor of the Palestine Nexus newsletter, where Zach and others, historians, archive a lot of material on Palestine that people want to erase. Zach, thanks so much for coming on the show.
It's my pleasure, Emma. Thanks so much for having me.
So yesterday was a horrible day. Seeing I don't feel patriotic a lot. It's just not in my nature. But I feel like a reflexive patriotism when I see this genocidal maniac speaking in my hall of Congress. Like, I don't know what your visceral reaction was to seeing that guy there, but after everything, it just made me sick to my stomach.
I've never been so ashamed to be an American citizen. Here we have our elected representatives cheering on, applauding, standing ovations for a leader of a country actively engaged in genocidal acts, according to UN Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese. According to the ICJ, it's carrying out a plausible genocide. According to the ICC, we have requests for arrest warrants for both Netanyahu and his defense minister for carrying out war crimes. And this is the guy we're giving a standing ovation to. These are our elected representatives. It's absolutely disgusting.
It was horrible to see, and we'll get to the speech in a second. But I think, to to our discredit, to be honest, and I can get wrapped up in these things as well. Gaza has fallen out of the news in a way that it shouldn't, because the atrocities really ramped up during this time period. After Biden's debate and all the speculation for weeks about him dropping out, that was really the thing that dominated the news cycle. And at that time, Israel was escalating the genocide in Gaza because they do this notably when they know the American public is distracted. Netanyahu has bragged in the past about being able to manipulate the American public. And they, during this news cycle, bombed multiple United Nations schools in manners of days. Polio and disease is spreading. Starvation is all over Gaza. And this was in the midst of the supposed ceasefire negotiations, which have fallen apart, I don't know, dozens, many times. We could just go through, Bradley prepares us news packets every day. And for the past 10 months, the negotiations are close. They're so close. Oh, they've fallen apart again. And it usually is the result of something getting leaked to the press, or Israel committing an act of violence that throws things off its axis. And we know through Haaretz's reporting that Netanyahu is leaking things to the press, and people believe he's deliberately sabotaging the negotiations. So that's where we are right now. If you don't mind elaborating, Zach.
Yeah, we had a report just a few days ago in the Jerusalem Post, which I would describe as a pro-apartheid, pro-genocide publication that generally speaks relatively positively of Netanyahu. The title of a Jerusalem Post article just a few days ago was Netanyahu is himself actively sabotaging attempts to reaching a ceasefire and a hostage deal. And this is something we've known for months. We've known for months that Netanyahu's coalition will collapse in the event that he reaches a ceasefire deal. We know that because his coalition, which includes Bezalel Smotrich, which includes Itamar Ben-Gvir, we're talking about the most right-wing fascist elements in Israeli society. We're talking about people who are self-declared fascists and homophobes. That's Smotrich. People who have been convicted on charges of terrorism. That's Ben-Gvir. These are the people he's sitting in a cabinet with. He's sitting in a coalition with. They have declared openly, if there's a ceasefire, we will bring down the government. So we've known for 9 months that there's no chance there will be a ceasefire, because a ceasefire means the end of the Netanyahu government. And an end of the Netanyahu government means he will go back to facing his criminal prosecution charges. Currently, he has 3 outstanding cases for bribery, corruption, and breach of public trust. And it's quite likely that he will be convicted of those charges and he will go to prison. So for Netanyahu, it's either I go to prison or I continue the war. Mm-hmm. So of course the war will continue.
And those facts have been clear since October 8th, since prior to October 7th as well. Like, just by the way that the coalition has was formed. Netanyahu formed his majority with the far right. So by its very nature, the he is beholden to them, even though I know it's his ideology as well. But even if you want to have some starry-eyed view of what his incentives are here, the Biden administration should have known from the get-go that he would not end these genocidal acts because of the self-interest that you describe. And within Israeli society, I know there have been a lot of protests in Tel Aviv and other urban centers, but the settler class of Israelis, the people that want to expand even further into the West Bank and steal more land and take Gaza and develop on that land, they make up a part of Israeli society that doesn't get covered in the way that these large-scale protests in cities do, but they have a lot of power here as well.
They are the ones making all the key decisions over Palestinian life, over the lives of 5 million Palestinians. You have, in the past few months, the Israeli government, led by Smotrich, has transferred over the authority of the civilian settlements in the occupied West Bank. That authority has been transferred over from the Israeli military to the civilian administration led by Finance Minister Smotrich. So we're no longer talking about a case of apartheid de jure. We're no longer talking about a case of apartheid in practice. We're talking about a case of apartheid on paper. The government of Israel, the civilian government of Israel, is controlling the lives of 3 million Palestinians in the West Bank. That is now a fact. They have the concept of a military occupation is that the military makes the key decisions. That is no longer the case in the West Bank. There's not even a facade of an occupation anymore. There's the facade of occupation has been transformed into a reality of de jure apartheid.
And that is because, just to elaborate on your point, Netanyahu transferred the power to Smotrich and his gang of thugs, essentially, saying that this is, this is not a military operation. This is basically a formalized expansionist land seizure that's done not just by maintaining the slow rolling of seizure of land, but also deploying these extremists to do so in practice in the West Bank as we speak.
Over the past 9 months, we've seen more settler violence than at any point in all of Israeli history. There have been more than 1,500 Palestinians who have been ethnically cleansed from their communities in the West Bank. We're talking about more than a dozen communities in the West Bank who have been expelled, ethnically cleansed from their villages in Turmas Aya, in Khan al-Ahmar, in the South Hebron Hills, in Ain Samia, in Homsa, in the northern West Bank. Wherever you go in the West Bank, there are violent settler Israeli radicalists who are engaging in terrorism not on a daily basis, on an hourly basis. And those settlers have direct support from ministers sitting in Netanyahu's government. That is who's in charge in Israel right now.
Right. And can you speak a little bit about can you speak more to the desperation that Netanyahu may be feeling? Like he has his individual corruption and criminal prosecution to worry about within Israel. But, I am also interested in seeing reports of economic collapse within Israel. I know that many businesses have gone bankrupt, and of course there's been a huge drop-off in tourism, which Israel incentivizes through many programs like Birthright, but for other tourists as well. I know that there have been some victories for BDS, including Intel axing a $25 billion, I think it was a chips investment in Israel, and BDS touted that as a massive victory, agreed on that front. What are some of the domestic economic pressures that he's facing?
I think there was a report that came out not too long ago suggesting that something like 60,000 Israeli businesses have gone under since October 7th. And this obviously makes a ton of sense, because who in the right mind wants to visit a country carrying out a genocide So tourism has fallen off a cliff. We know that the tech sector, one of Israel's most important sectors, has seen a massive decline in foreign direct investment. Who wants to invest in a country's tech sector that is carrying out a genocide? We know that Israel it's a small country. It has a relatively small armed force. And so it has been forced over the past 9 months to call up tens of thousands of reservists. These are people who are extremely important to the Israeli economy. Every company is missing 10, 20, 30% of its workforce. How do you carry out normal operations of a business when you're missing so many of your employees? Not to mention, obviously, the Israeli bonds are now suffering because who wants to buy the bonds associated with a country that is expending all of its financial resources on war? I think the Israeli economy is suffering now, and it will continue to suffer. And this is just the beginning. I mean, people don't realize this. Genocide is a crime that doesn't go away. There are no statute of limitations on the warrants that the ICC is going to issue. There is no statute of limitations on the ICJ case. Right? This will follow Israel for the indefinite future, short of a complete overhaul and a complete removal of the entire ruling class in Israel, which is essentially unthinkable because the ruling class has the support of the population. This is a popular war. The general public in Israel supports the war effort. So the idea that there would be a removal of the current power elite in Israel is essentially a total a pipe dream. So what we're talking about is a country and a political elite and an economy that will continue to get worse and worse and worse as more countries cut off economic ties, as more countries stop recognizing Israeli passports, as fewer tourists go to travel to Israel. The country will continue to deteriorate, both from a legitimacy perspective, but also from an economic perspective.
And is there truth to a lot of Israelis who have dual citizenship? Definitely not a settler colonial state. But of course, like is it true that a lot of them have left and are going back to countries where they also have citizenship?
Oh, there's no question that many, many Israelis have left. You have tens of thousands of Israelis in the north who have become effectively either internally displaced persons or refugees, right? Because they can't go to their homes, they don't feel safe, and they probably will never feel safe going back to their homes in the north. You have the Gaza envelope, where you have tens of thousands of Israelis in the south who are displaced, and many of them have left the country. Because who wants to live in a country that is actively engaged in a genocide, where you are going to be called up to reserve duty? You now have even reservists claiming they're no longer willing to serve in the IDF. I think the reports are real of Israelis leaving, and I think that is this is the beginning. I think you have to think of Israeli history as there's before 2023 and there's after 2023. The country we knew before October 7, 2023 is gone. We're never going back to it. The borders of the country have shrunk.
Right. And the point is that I do think, it's going to be a slow death of Zionism, but how many Palestinians are slaughtered and suffer and lose limbs and are given irrevocable injuries for the rest of their lives in the process. Patton from Ohio writes in, question for the guests. People were speculating that the recent Israeli Supreme Court decision to require ultra-Orthodox Jews to be conscripted would lead to the collapse of Bibi's ruling coalition. Is that a possibility?
So it seems unlikely that this would lead to the collapse of the coalition, because Netanyahu is very careful about his approach to conscripting the ultra-Orthodox. He's not a fool. He understands that if tomorrow he declares all 100 or 200,000 ultra-Orthodox young men need to enlist, that will obviously cause him problems at home. So his approach has been piecemeal. It has been, let's take baby steps. It has been, let's first issue conscription orders to those ultra-Orthodox men who are not sitting in a religious seminary and studying religious texts all day, but let's issue those conscription orders to those Israeli ultra-Orthodox men who are already in the workforce. So he's taking a careful approach here. So I don't expect this to bring down the coalition, no.
And have there not been previous Supreme Court rulings within Israel that tried to force the ultra-Orthodox into conscription, that basically they just kind of get around it regardless for political purposes?
There have been previous attempts to conscript them, and they've always failed. I mean, the ultra Orthodox are dead set on their opposition to serving in the Israeli army. For many within the ultra Orthodox community, including 100,000 Satmar Hasidim, the Israeli state is an abomination. In Judaism it would be known as Chilul Hashem, a desecration of God's name, because it's presenting Judaism. It's kind of outwardly facing. It is claiming to be a Jewish state, but it's carrying out all these grotesque acts of violence, ethnic cleansing, apartheid, genocide. So it's defaming Judaism, which is an abomination.
Right. And what do you think about the news about Hamas and Fatah coming together and coming to an agreement based on, again, China brokering this, which they seem to be really taking advantage of the United States being just demonically supportive of Israel right now?
There's so much to say here. There have been many attempts in the past between Fatah and Hamas, going back to 2005, 6, 7, to form a kind of a unity government. Almost every single one of those attempts was sabotaged either by Israel or the United States. Israel and the United States know that any kind of coalition that includes Hamas will require Israel to make real concessions, will require Israel to actually withdraw from the occupied territories, to actually end its policy of taking Palestinian hostages. It will require Israel to actually give Palestinian sovereignty in East Jerusalem, to actually come up with a just resolution to the refugee issue. And Israelis know that. So any attempt to bring Hamas into the PLO, to create these unity governments between Fatah and Hamas, these are always sabotaged by Israel. I'm not, and by the way, I don't mean to let Mahmoud Abbas off the hook here. He has played an active role in sabotaging these attempts himself. He has not shared power at all. He was elected 16 years ago and hasn't held an election since. He's an autocrat. Abbas is obviously an obstacle. Israel is obviously an obstacle. The United States is obviously an obstacle. But this is a very positive development. We've known for a long time that if there's ever going to be some kind of political settlement, some kind of negotiated resolution, it has to involve all Palestinian political parties. You can't end the violence without bringing to the table the people causing the violence. So this is a necessary precondition, and that's why it's absolutely shameful to see Mahmoud Abbas continually sabotage these agreements by not sharing power, and even more shameful to see the United States and Israel sabotage what is obviously the only hope for a negotiated settlement.
Well, they've been trying to factionalize the Palestinians in Gaza and the Palestinians in the West Bank and having different authorities for this very reason, right? To prevent solidarity and I mean, that's in part also the geographic segmenting, but it's also the political segmenting to make sure that they can have more and more time to take more and more land, kill more and more people, and expand Israel's boundaries. That's been modus operandi for Israel.
Palestinian unity is a nightmare for Israel, okay? Palestinian unity means that there's actually, you have a real partner for peace. You have someone you actually have to talk to. You can no longer make excuses. You can't pretend that the problem is on the other side. So for decades, this policy goes back to the 1980s when Israel tried to drive a wedge between the PLO in exile and Palestinian groups in the occupied territories by funding and supporting PLO rivals. And it's a policy that Israel pursued in the 2000s and 2010s. When it actively supported and funded Hamas, it allowed Qatari officials to send tens of millions of dollars into the Gaza Strip every month to back up and support the Hamas government in Gaza in order to drive a wedge between Hamas and Fatah for the reasons we just stated, that Palestinian unity is a nightmare for Israel, especially those in Israel who want total domination, who want to instrument and solidify Israel's apartheid regime in the West Bank and everywhere else in Israel.
Right. We have so far to go in terms of getting Israelis to maybe consider the fact that perhaps they could live alongside the millions of people that they have occupied, and we can all live in an integrated society. We shall see. I think it has to be obviously imposed upon them. But I appreciate all that backdrop, Zach, and all of the context that leads into this Netanyahu address yesterday. So
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.